Hi there, and welcome to Fantasy for the Ages, the show where a father and son sit down and talk about some fantasy books. I'm the son of that equation, Zach.
And I'm going to stop us and start again.
Oh no!
I just had something happen weird with my headphones. Wait, talk again.
Okay, are we having technical difficulties that have suddenly resolved themselves?
They just suddenly resolved themselves.
I guess we'll keep going.
We'll keep going. I was like, suddenly it was gone in one ear, and then what? Wait, no. Okay.
No, that's just your hearing, Dad.
Oh, it could be. Let's hope not. So you were saying?
Oh yeah, my name's Zach. That's Jim. He's my dad. But we have this podcast together where we talk about fantasy books sometimes. Sometimes we just have technical difficulties.
Apparently. Thanks for being here with us, everybody, and for powering along as technology may fail us at times, but we shall strive never to fail you. As we gather again today to just have some fun talking about something great from fantasy literature. Zach, how you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I had a little bit extra time between recording episodes than we sometimes do because we didn't go quite as long. So I've actually eaten something today, which is good.
Ooh, yes. You have recharged your power base.
Yeah, eating food is good. Usually I just kind of wait until after we're done recording. But I did good. How are you doing, Dad?
I'm doing fine. I actually had time to go kick back with your mom a little bit. We were both reading books. I was reading more of book 3 of The Expanse.
Fantastic.
Abaddon's Gate. And I'm about halfway through. It is fantastic. So, and now, jumping back in. You mentioned we've already done one recording already today.
Yes.
So here for our second recording, I'm drinking water because I had enough with the first one, and I didn't need more booze, so just water today. How about you?
I'm taking a similar page, but not exactly the same. Just cooling off with some Dr. Pepper. This time it is a cherry Dr. Pepper because we've still got some of that. Not as good as cherry Coke, I will say. Dr. Pepper, fantastic. Cherry Dr. Pepper, it's okay.
You know, Dr. Pepper is a little sweeter than Coke, so when then you add the cherry flavor, it can almost get sickly sweet.
Rach says it's a little bit medicine-y.
Yeah. I think she's onto something with that. All right. Well, before we jump into our content today, I have one note, and only one note to share. And that's to remind people of our Frosty Mug Giveaway. So we want to give you a chance to win one of 2 free Frosty Mugs for Fantasy for the Ages that we will be shipping somewhere around the world. All you have to do to get into that drawing is, by the end of April, toss us a 4 or 5-star rating on Apple Podcast and write a review. Okay, so if we see a review from any of you before the end of April, you get put into the drawing. And May 1st, we'll pull a couple of names. We'll try to find who you are and send you a free Frosty Mug. If you don't tell us who you are, that's going to be problematic. So we do invite you to tell us after you do one of those postings. Hit us up on Twitter or send us an email or Facebook, Instagram. Best of all, join us on Discord. Our Discord invite is in the show notes. And you can say, hey, Jim, hey, Zach, I'm that person who just gave you that incredible, awesome 5-star review. I tried to give 6 and they wouldn't let me.
And we'll be like, oh, yeah, that's awesome. And in a month's time, you know, we may draw your name on this Frosty Mug thing.
We're looking forward to giving some away. And thank you for those of you who take that extra step to get onto Apple Podcast and write a review. It helps people learn about the content we're putting out here. And if you don't normally listen to us on Apple Podcasts, that means you took extra effort and energy. So thank you in advance if you choose to do it.
All right, with that out of the way, what are we doing today, Dad?
Well, this is one of our midweek specials where we're going to continue on in the to read or not to read episode series.
Yes, that is the question.
Yes. So we pick different fantasy and sci-fi series that we are familiar with and talk about the books. Spoiler light. So we're not going to, ruin these books for anybody who hasn't read them.
That's good.
But we're going to give our subjective opinion on them. Why you might like it, why you might not. In the end, we will give some legit reasons for that. It's not just, you'll like it because I liked it. We'll do a little better than that. In this case, I'm the one who will do a little better than that because we're doing a series Zach has not touched.
What are you talking about? I'm still going to give it a score.
Apparently based entirely on what I happen to say about it in this episode.
Yes.
You've seen the title of the episode, I'm sure. We are featuring the Rift War Cycle. So, as is the norm for these episodes, let me bring everyone up to speed with just the facts on this series. There are 30 books in this series, though one could argue there are now 31. I'll explain. The first book in the Rift War Cycle was originally published in 1982 in the United Kingdom as Magician. 4 years later, it was republished in the United States as 2 separate books. Magician Apprentice and then Magician Master. Yes, so it's the same thing, but first it was 1, then it was 2. So technically we can say there's 31 books in the series now. Raymond E. Feist is the author of this series. However, multiple books in the cycle, 6 different books, he's had a co-author with him. Fantastic. Including, most notably, the second trilogy in the series, Janny Wirtz, who's also known for many other fantasy books and series. She co-wrote that trilogy with him. So I'll talk more about that in a moment. The Rift War Cycle, as I said, began in 1982 with an original trilogy, now I guess quadrilogy. Is that a word?
Quadrilogy? Yes.
I looked it up and computer thinks I'm misspelling it, so I couldn't find it.
If it's not technically a word, everyone knows what we're saying. We'll
go with it. All right. So this was called the Rift War Saga. Okay, so this opening story. And it happens and it ends. And it's an event. This was followed by the Empire Trilogy, which is, again, co-authored by Janny Wirtz. And it had a distinctively different tone than the Rift War Saga. It describes events that take place mostly concurrently with what happens in the first trilogy. And I'll get to why, what's going on there, again, later in the episode. But some people really, really like the Empire Trilogy. Some, not so much. Because, again, a very different tone, a different setting. It's almost like a totally different series. Okay. I remember finding it very shocking when I first read it. I'm like, I really love the Rift War Saga, and I moved right into the Empire Trilogy, and what the heck is this?
This is not more of what I was reading before.
No, it's very different, even though there is a key character who's a through line between all these books. So it was clearly part of the cycle. It was just very different. Now, I find nothing else in the Rift War Cycle is like the Empire Trilogy.
Okay.
So if that is something you just totally love, you're not going to enjoy the rest of the series nearly as much.
Is the rest of it like the initial Rift War Saga?
Yes. The rest is very much like the initial Rift War Saga. So if you really love that, keep going with this series for sure. Now, hopefully you like both of these initial sets because you can't skip one. You know, the Empire Trilogy is vital foundation for what else happens over the next 20 plus books. You've got to have it. It's just a little different tone. Feist wrote 5 more sets of stories in the cycle between 1989 and 2003 that pretty much wraps up the story arc of the first key characters and events of the cycle. That last set is called Legends of the Rift War. And it's a trilogy of books where, again, he brought in co-authors. But this time, each book has a different co-author because they're different standalone stories that are each part of Legends of the Rift War.
So what I'm hearing is this series has 5 authors.
Yes, that would be correct. 5 different authors. So the other authors here, William R. Fortune, Joel Rosenberg, and S.M. Sterling, they're all accomplished authors in their own right. They've written other fantasy and sci-fi stuff. They're out and about doing things. This is not the only thing they've written. In fact, Joel Rosenberg wrote the Guardians of the Flame series that I really enjoyed. I know our Discordian Gentle Giant Jason totally loves that too. Featured its first book in our recent Fantasy for the Ages Tri-Reader Tournament. Yeah. So other great authors partnered with him. But okay, we get all the way to the end of that Legends of the Rift War in 2003.
2003.
And then he kind of does a reboot. That's not the right term. Really what happens is he does a time jump.
Forward or back?
Into the future. A time jump into the future. Okay. So a good chunk of time has passed. All the characters from the original series,
they're all dead.
Dead. Now that's not entirely true. I'll explain why. But nearly everybody's dead. We saw them, and we didn't see them in a fixed period of time. Those initial stories, time still passed. We saw characters who were young grow old and die.
Events
but it was that generation,
time, so as
basically.
you read it, they got older.
Yeah. And then this time jump, and we get introduced to brand new characters, new things going on, a new setting. But here's the thing.
Okay.
Magic is a part of the Rift War cycle. Because of magic, certain characters have a much longer lifespan than the majority. So there are a few key characters, including the lead protagonist. They don't live just one normal short lifespan. They're the through point of the entire cycle.
I kind of like your reasoning there. It's like, why does this happen? Because magic.
That's right. So that is kind of a mini spoiler that there are some characters who will continue through. I didn't say they continue all the way to the end, but there are some that cross over that time jump. Okay. And that's what ties this together as one big Rift War cycle. So 2002 is when that second set starts out. Now, I said the previous set ended in 2003 because the Legends of the Rift War are almost like standalone novels set in the Rift War universe. They're a little different than just flowing with the rest. So there's a little overlap in how those dropped.
Okay.
But 2002 is when the next trilogy started that begins that second era. That goes on for 11 years. The series ends with the 31st book in 2013 called, very appropriately, Magician's End. It started with Magician. It ends with Magician's End. So there's some, I don't know what word I want there. I'll just gesture for a while. Okay. Now, again, this is a high level conversation about the Rift War cycle. We're staying spoiler light, so I'm not going to dig in and go deep into all the plot
high level,
lines.
You mean like surface level, not high level intellectual getting into it.
Oh no, we're not highbrow here. We don't do that sort of thing.
It's just that's grazing off the surface.
But I will share one key thing here that is, well, I'm looking at my notes. I kind of got ahead of myself. I want to explain this just a little further.
Please do.
I mentioned these key characters that do stay through the cycle because of magic. Okay. I think this is one of the things that makes the Rift War cycle stand out as perhaps better than some of the other fantasy series that stretch over a whole long time period, like Shannara.
Yeah, I was actually going to name drop that one because one of the things that I've seen, I have not finished that series, but I have started that one. And an inconsistency of characters makes it hard for me because you want to grow attached and then they don't carry through.
Yeah. It keeps moving through the years, so you keep leaving characters behind. They're dead. They're gone. It's over. And we're on to new people constantly, all the way through Shannara. Yeah, Rift War, you get to hang on to some things. You get some favorites who will still be there in different ways, different iterations. They grow, they develop. They're not static characters, but they're
Sometimes they
still
become
the
a Force
people.
ghost, and we get a new Obi-Wan movie series, something coming soon. That's interesting.
Okay. So that's the Rift War cycle. Okay, this whole storyline. I haven't told you anything about the Rift War.
You haven't told me anything about like really any of it.
So I kind of do need to tell you a little bit about it, or you're not going to be able to, talk about recommendations at all.
Okay,
But
give me a pitch.
I'm going to save that for when we talk about the strengths of the series, which is always one of our segments here. So that's coming. There are some things I'll share there. But first, we always talk about our personal experiences with the series. You go first.
I currently own The Magician Apprentice.
You do?
I bought it as some of my Christmas haul.
Okay.
I believe it was Christmas haul. It might have even been birthday haul, I think. No, I think it was birthday haul.
Okay.
It's sitting on the shelf. It's a little bit further back just because I know it is a massive series. So I have other trilogies and things ahead of it. But I am planning to at least read this first one, at least by the end of the year. Everything that's on my shelves right now, I will read by the end of the year.
Okay. So it's coming.
That's like my entire experience. There's a chance that this is one of the series that, like, as a kid, and when I say kid, I mean like 7, 8. You and I were on a walk, and you told me bits and pieces of this story.
May have done that.
But I have no way of knowing that. So please, what's your experience with the Rift War Cycle?
Well, I don't remember exactly when I started reading this, but I know I read what I described earlier as the first era quite a while ago. And it's entirely possible I read all that before 2002. So like I read as much as existed at the time and then didn't read anything else, didn't pay attention that more had come out. And then I did eventually catch on that there were some more of these coming along, but I was reading other stuff. I'm into other things. And then I saw that it finished. Now, you know how I feel about a series once it's done. It's like,
yeah,
that's
you go back
the
and
money
reread.
spot. Yeah. Well, no, sometimes. In this case, I remembered the original stuff pretty well. I may have checked Wikipedia to refresh myself on a couple of points. I might have.
Who are you, Zach?
And then I just picked up where I'd left off, which ended up just being perfect. Since there was the time gap that I read the second era from start to finish, just straight through, plowed through them, which was great. I believe that was 12 books all told. So not half the series. It's like more like 2/5 of the series is what's left.
This was 31 in
31
the US?
books. 31 books total. 12 of them are after the time gap. Because it's a set of 3, a set of 2, a set of 4, and a set of 3.
That's the stuff that comes after?
Yes.
Gotcha. I thought you were starting through the whole thing, and I was like, how did that work? It started with the set of 3
Who's
or 4.
Who's going to remember that? Yeah. Anyways, I completed the series just early last year. And it was a very satisfying ride. A lot of closure in the end. A lot of things that have been out there for books and books finally come to conclusions and wrap-ups. And that was very nice. So let me move into some of the general strengths of the series, and then you can kind of understand a little bit about why it was very nice. So it's called the Rift War Cycle.
Is there a war around a rift?
There is. Okay. So the series is primarily based on a planet called Midkemia. Okay. And there are different lands in Midkemia. Our Main characters are primarily members of the Kingdom of the Isles.
Like Islands Isles, or
Yes,
like
yes.
Walk the Isles?
Islands. Isles.
Cool.
And the capital is on one of these islands, but their territory goes beyond just islands, but they started on an island and spread from there. Okay, that's history at the point that the story starts. But in the far western reaches of this island, kind of out in the middle of the wilderness area, it's the frontier, a rift appears. Now, when I say rift, what this means is a magical rift. An opening.
Space continuum.
Not time space, just space. Because it's an opening between Midkemia and another world that is invading. Yay!
Oh, no.
Yeah. The Serani are invading from their homeworld world of Kellowan. Over the course of the series, you'll learn why and yada yada and all the things that happen as a result. But these people are fantastic soldiers. They're humans, just like the people here in Midkemia are humans, even though there are other types of creatures and beings in this series. The main characters are humans. But there's humans on both worlds. Okay. There is a reason for that. You learn about that eventually.
We're going to go, they're humans on both worlds, not like there's Midkemians and there's whatever the other places was.
Nope, they are genuinely
we're calling
humans. They're people. They're biologically the same. And they're invading now.
Okay.
And they come with overwhelming force. And it goes very badly at first because they have very powerful magic. I mean, they created this rift between worlds. This is strong stuff. Midkemia has magic as well, but it's much more low key. There's not a lot of people practicing magic around.
They just have like chill magic, yo.
But there is one key character who comes to be in touch with his magical power. And that ends up making a big difference. Not him by himself. There's others involved too. But definitely magic on both sides comes into play. Now, I said that there's this initial trilogy, the Rift War Saga, and then there's the Empire trilogy.
Does the Empire take place on the other planet?
It does. It does.
It
takes place on
totally
Kellowan.
Different vibe, totally different everything. That makes sense.
Except
it is different.
That one character who comes in touch with his magical potential ends up a slave on the other planet, on Kellowan. And this is what's cool, because he develops his magical potential, but before he can totally maximize it, he's sucked into the other world as a captive, and they discover he has magical potential, and he is trained and learns their magical way. Things kind of work out.
So he gets the best of both worlds.
Yes, he becomes
our character
the one
is Hannah Montana.
Perhaps. But he becomes one person who has mastered the magic of both worlds and plays a huge role in how this all works out at the end of these first two series. But a rift, then, is something that's going to continue to play a key role throughout the cycle. We learn more about these magical rifts and that there's one invasion rift. Okay, there's more to rifts than we realized when this first initial story happens. So they're a part in various different ways throughout the cycle, as is magic, as is politics and armies and mystery, intrigue, and deception. I mean, there's all sorts of layers.
Now, I have to follow up. Does this cross does it cross the aisle? I like that. We're in aisles. Into that sci-fi fantasy. You said there were different worlds, this rift. Yeah, there's magic, but does it cross that line?
It does not. It is heavily in the fantasy realm. Yes, there are different worlds, different planets, but for the most part, any connection between planets and different places is all accomplished magically. And that has just been the way it is. This is not, we built spaceships and we traveled somewhere. That's not part of this story. This is not a sci-fi series in any way. It's fantasy. So, again, a strength of the series, the rift, the very idea that you develop a way that one world invades another, and all the magic and intrigue and actual army battles that are part of that. It also has great characters, and characters that are not static. I mentioned that once already. A strength is seeing the growth and development of characters through the various different trilogies and quadrilogies they may appear in. And the second era, even though it introduces some brand new characters, it also introduces some characters who have clear ties to the characters from the original. So while they're brand new,
you know them.
They flow from people you already knew in some ways. So everything connects. The second era isn't like totally different. It ties to the first. It flows from the first in some very satisfying ways.
Are we at a point where I can mention a flaw in the series yet?
Sure. Because
it's so stinking long.
And a series is not flawed for being long if you want more.
No. However, when we are asking the question to read or not to read, a definite drawback in that question is the length of a series. It can be incredibly intimidating.
At the same time, here's an advantage in a series like the Rift War Cycle over something like Wheel of Time, which we've talked about being intimidating.
It has bite-sized chunks?
Yes. You've got this clear trilogy that tells a story. And you could just read that, not read anything else, and you still had a complete story. Or that one quadrilogy, or that one duology. You know, they're in chunks. Read a chunk. Jordo in Discord mentions the Cosmere. Something similar there. You've got these different sections. They're all connected to a story, but you can read just the part you want.
Exactly.
So, yes, Rift War Cycle is long. The Rift War Saga is not. Quick little trilogy, well, quadrilogy now, to read and enjoy. The Empire Trilogy, separate story, all on its own, introduces some characters you're never going to see again. Some of them you will, some you won't. But it's a satisfying and enjoyable story just for itself. So,
another potential drawback that I will bring up, I don't think it's actually that big of a deal, but I do need to mention it. You said these books were initially started back in the 80s. Now, that is not a problem in and of itself. Books can be written ways ago, 80s, 70s, 60s, go further back even. They can still be amazing. However, I have found on occasion you run into something that gets a little dated, whether it's in its language or its conceptualization. It can be a little bit tougher to really get into initially if those first couple books are a little older.
Now, again, you haven't read this series.
No,
so let me
that's
speak
where
to that.
I don't know for that for sure yet.
This is a series that, as you said, started in the 80s, and I'd say pretty much stays in the 80s. But only in the sense that it's classic fantasy. It doesn't become modern fantasy. There's no grimdark. There's no... I mean, the characters are very recognizable caricatures.
Archetypes.
You know, the archetypes. That's the word I wanted. Very, very recognizable. The men are men. The women are women. There's some strong women in the series, but they're still fitting within the woman role of the fantasy genre. So what you were comfortable with back in the 80s and 90s plays through to 2013.
Depending on your views, who you are, that will be either a strength or a weakness. For you, Dad, that might be a strength. For me, it leans a little bit closer to a weakness than it does a strength, but that's just because of who I am and what I enjoy reading.
Yeah, you're not going to really find anything in this series that will challenge the modern reader. It's very comfortable, very easy to read as old school classic fantasy. Would we ever read this series again?
Yes, because I haven't read it yet.
And no, for me. Just because it's one where, as you said, it's a long series. That's a lot of reading to do. I enjoyed completing it. I won't read it again because I've checked this one off and I've got so much more to read.
would you ever consider reading chunks of it again? Like, for example, the Empire Trilogy that is so different.
I don't think so. I probably should, because I may sell it short a little bit. I know my first experience and encounter with it again was so jarring that maybe skewed how I appreciated it. I will say the third book of the trilogy, the Empire Trilogy, was a winner. I love the conclusion of it. But to get there was a little slow for me. Yeah, because it was painting this whole different world. And I'd already learned a world. And we're not in that one anymore. Now we had to go somewhere else. And I didn't want to. So maybe hissy fit at the time. I don't know. But again, you got to read it. You can't skip the Empire Trilogy. The elements it brings to the story are absolutely vital.
That's fair.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I'd ever read it again. Again, this is not a series I consider super deep.
It's well connected, it's well thought out, but it doesn't.
There's not a lot of foreshadowing that you can't see. There's foreshadowing, but it's kind of
you see it, it's
fairly
there.
Recognizable foreshadowing.
It's
and
like, duh, it's a great payoff, but I expected it.
When the payoff comes, you're like, oh yeah, that's what this thing was referencing. You get it.
You're not going to suddenly get that insight on a reread.
Right. So some people may totally disagree with me on that, but I don't think this is one that's going to get a lot richer from a reread. It may be entertaining again, not a lot richer. So I don't have really general weaknesses that I would emphasize beyond things you've asked about that I can acknowledge. It's just a basic classic fantasy series that I definitely enjoyed. It was interesting. Lots of good characters. Not really deep enough that I'd want to reread it. Yeah. But definitely I want everybody to read it so they'd enjoy it like I did.
I have a question. And this may just be me as a question, but it's kind of what's the correct word I'm looking for here? My litmus test. Let's go with that.
Okay.
As to whether it's a world I want to dive into. And that question is this a world that you would want to play a D&D campaign in? Not a traditional D&D campaign necessarily, but would you personally enjoy being able to be a character and play a game in this world?
Oh, totally. It's definitely got the richness for that. Yes.
And that, I think, is a healthy sign of great world building, and excites me.
Some of the characters that also make it rich, you've got, and I can say this because you learned this fairly early on, you've got humans, of course. You've got elves. You've got dwarves. They're different than you've seen in other series, but still, the characters are there. There are dragons.
Dragons.
Rare. Yeah. There are bad guy characters. They tend to be more unique than what you're used to. Some of them are familiar. Some of them are like, whoa, what's this? So he got a little creative with some of the nastier creatures that are part of the series.
Some of them are just like little ants, literally, because it's funny.
Not going to give you that. Some of the bad guys are people. You got some really bad people in this series at times. So, I said there's no grimdark, but there are dark points for sure. The good guys do not always win. It's a little more realistic that sometimes bad things do happen to good people despite their best efforts. So it's got some richness to it in that way, and that just makes it more satisfying. But all the different settings, you've got the forests, you've got the islands, you've got the great cities and castles, you've got a desert nation where they're more the more Arabic flair of their style of things, but almost at the same time based on more of a Roman empire type build. You've got lots of different types of nationalities to interact with and do things.
Alexander the Great is what you're telling me.
Sorta, in a way. A little more maybe some of the later Caesars.
Hey.
And then what it does with magic, where it takes that, is a really rich part of the story. So you could do a lot of D&D campaigns in the midst of the various things that are created. Yeah. All right, rating scale. You have no way to seriously give an accurate rating score to this
but
series.
I do have 2 cents, which is to say, at some point, by the end of this year, at least for the first book, I will be reading this series. I do plan on it. And if you want to know what my ratings end up being on this one, come check out our Discord, where
there you go.
Team Midchemia is a channel, and eventually my ratings will be posted in there.
Yeah. This is one of the stronger series that I've read in its cohesiveness and in the playthrough of the overall story arc, and some characters that I stayed very interested in for a long time. So I wish I was keeping track of what I rated other series and stuff, so I can see where am I placing this in comparison to others. But my gut tells me to give this a 75. So out of 100, it's strongly in the upper half. It's right at the 3/4 point. It's a pretty strong performer for me.
Yeah, for things that you've read, that's pretty good.
Leaves room for other things to certainly be bigger and better. I have certainly read some things that have grabbed me much more now than the Rift War Cycle, but 75. I'll give that a solid question. So then I have to answer, what sort of person do I think would enjoy this series? Again, fans of old school classical fantasy are going to like it. Fans of some of the more sword and sorcery style is going to enjoy this, because you've got a real mix of the arms and the magic. If whenever there's a dragon, you go like Zach, dragon. Okay, give it a check, give it a try.
I would hazard someone to not recommend this to. Don't recommend the Rift War Saga or rather the Rift War Cycle to a new fantasy reader.
No, I disagree. Someone who's brand new, this is not hard to comprehend. It eases you in very nicely.
No, I don't think it's hard to comprehend, is what I'm saying. But anything more than 5 books in a series shouldn't be your first exposure to fantasy.
But again, you could just give them the Rift War Saga and let them enjoy it. Let them find out there's more books if they really dug it and they want more. You don't have to tell them about the cycle. Just, hey, check out this Magician series. There's 4 books. They're really cool.
Now, I will also say I'm in the camp of not giving classic fantasy to a new fantasy reader. That's for someone who loves fantasy, to me.
Man, with that choice, some people will never go back to enjoy the classics.
I fully understand that. I understand that I might be in the minority of thinking that. It may just be people may bombard us and be like, oh, he's too young, too new school. That's okay.
New school? Is that a thing? New school?
Sure.
I know there's old school, but really?
It's a new school? Yeah, sure. But when it comes down to it, yeah, I am young. Yeah, I do read modern fantasy and enjoy it. I do like classic fantasy, but I do not recognize the differences and distinctions.
Okay. I'm responding to a Discord question. Sorry, I tried to do that sneakily and it didn't work out that time. So no, I really think this is one that would be a great way to introduce the fantasy genre to someone, because it's solidly written. It is classic. If they're gonna move on to things that are more gripping and gritty and stuff, they'll enjoy this better first than if they've gotten that stuff and then try to go back to this. And I'd like them to get this foundation. So I think this is a really nice way to ease in.
Maybe I'm eraist, because
well,
Jordo says in the Discord that like he would recommend this to himself in high school. And
sure, yeah,
I can't say the same for myself necessarily, but I also know, Jordo, you are at least a little bit older than me. Just a little.
I think he's like halfway between us.
But enough for me to recognize that in a previous time, yeah, no, if we were 20, 30 years ago, I would say probably, yeah, I'm on the boat of give it to a teen. I'm good with that.
All right. All right. So if you heard yourself described in that, go ahead and read it. But if you're watching this podcast, you probably are beyond this. I don't know. But if you've been checking off some boxes of old school fantasy and you missed this one, it's worthwhile. Check it out. At least try the first trilogy and then maybe, or the quadrilogy, and then maybe the second one because that tone is so different, and see what you think. And if it intrigued you, well, then there's a lot more to read and enjoy in this series.
Chances are, if you are listening to this and you haven't read this series, then you're in a boat kind of like me, already loving fantasy and would have an interest in this. So you'd fit into my recommendation, at least, that you should read it.
There we go. All right. That's a wrap on the Rift War Cycle, to read or not to read. You heard reasons for both. I hope you try it. Let me hit our outro. And we can remind some people of stuff.
I was the Home Alone kid for a moment, just a whole...
You were. I've actually got on one of our screens for one of our episodes that exact pose of yours.
Oh no. You always pick like the worst poses of me.
No, trust me, I don't pick the worst.
I'm sure there are
I've seen those. And, that's so bad.
You work really hard not to find
interesting, emoting ones. I do tend to come off looking a little smarter in them, but I think that's just coincidence or necessity.
I will eat the fact that I look very dumb a lot.
We'll talk to you next time, guys.